In this lesson, we're going to talk about how functions can be used as regular objects in Python. I'm going to show you some simple examples where we take a function and assign it to a variable, and then where we take a function and pass it as an argument to a function. And we're also going to introduce the concept of higher order functions, which we'll discuss in more detail in a later lesson. So let's get started. We'll call this program funcobj.py or funcobjs.py. And so let's work with some simple examples to try to keep the presentation clear. For example, we have a simple square function that takes a number and squares it. And we know how to use that function. Very simply, we can say num equals 2, square num equals square num, and that will square the value 2 and store 4 in square num. We can also assign this function to a variable. So for example, I can write sqnumber equals square. And then I can say sqnum equals sqnumber 2, and then we can print sqnum. And then what it will display is the result of this statement. So let's save that and then run the code. And you see that it returned 4. So what we've discovered is that a function is just an object like any other object in Python, and we can assign it to a variable should we choose to. Another thing we can do with functions is pass them as arguments to other functions. So what I want to do is I want to introduce a special function that's part of the Python language called map. Map takes two arguments, a function and a sequence of data, and it applies that function to the sequence of data. Let me explain what I mean and then show you an example. Let's say we have a list of numbers. We'll keep it small. If I square each number, we're going to get 1, 4, 9, and 16. So maybe I want to create another list that has these numbers in it squared. Well, of course, I could do it through a loop where I create an empty list and then loop through numbers and square each number. And that would take 3 or 4 lines of code. And I'm not going to write that code out, but you can imagine what it would look like. But instead, we can use this function called map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new program. We'll call it numbers squared. And we're going to assign it the result of building a list out of mapping the square function to our numbers list, like so. So let's look at this in pieces. So the first piece is map square to numbers. So what it's going to do is it's going to take each number and apply the square function, number times number, to it. And that's going to give a result. That result is then going to be added to the list function so that we're going to have another list that consists of 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, and 4 squared. And then to demonstrate how that works, we can write out numbers squared. So let's save. Let's clear the screen, run our program, and there's our new list, 1, 4, 9, and 16. Map is an example of what's called a higher order function. And if you're familiar with functional languages such as Scheme or Lisp or ML, then you've already been exposed to the concept of higher order functions. But a higher order function usually involves calling another function as an argument. And that's what we're doing right here is we're using functions square in the call to another function map, which actually is then used in yet another function call to list. In a couple of lessons, we're going to look at 2 other higher order functions, and we'll look at map again. Those functions are filter and reduce. But for now, I want to move to the next topic of the chapter, and that's where we're going to look at how we can create functions on the fly to use with map by writing what are called anonymous functions. And that's the topic of the next lesson.